There have been many werewolves in literature and film, but the defining popular image of the classic werewolf comes from Universal's The Wolfman, starring Lon Chaney. This is a replica of the wolf's head cane that's featured prominently in the film. Unlike the original prop, this one's made of genuine silver, so you could actually kill a real werewolf. Ouch! You know, the rules and regulations surrounding werewolves in The Wolfman owe less to folklore than to the fertile imagination of screenwriter Kurt Siodmak, who took over an abandoned project once intended for Boris Karloff and made it his own. Lon Chaney also put his uniquely personal imprint on the character. The Wolfman is the only classic Universal monster played by one actor alone over a series of 5 films. Interested in learning more? Then grab your wolfbane, your silver-tipped cane, and come along with me into the Universal vaults, where we'll uncover the secrets of a monster by moonlight.
There's an old poem. Even a man who is pure in heart and says his prayers by night
may become a wolf when the wolfbane blooms.
and the autumn moon is bright.
So you know that one too, huh?
Of course. Everyone knows about werewolves.
Legends about people who cross the boundary between the human and the animal are as old as recorded history. Primitive cultures often projected human characteristics onto the animal world, resulting in a rich folklore of shape-shifting tricksters, monstrous changelings, and even the story of Little Red Riding Hood. In Victorian times, real human oddities displaying unusual body hair were frequently presented to the public as sideshow attractions. Missing links between modern civilization and its shadowy, animalistic past. Wolf people, dog boys, and other fantastic beings became objects of dark fascination for a public both disturbed and attracted by the theories of Charles Darwin. In European folklore, the idea of the werewolf was intimately linked with the legend of the vampire. The Victorian novelist Bram Stoker, a contemporary of both Charles Darwin and P.T. Barnum, combined both legends in the title character of his classic novel, Dracula.
Listen to them, children of the night. What music they make.
Dracula's affinity for wolves went far beyond mere musical appreciation.
Did you see the look on his face? Like a wild animal.
Wild animal, like a madman.
What's that? Running across the lawn. Looks like a huge dog.
Or a wolf?
In Dracula, the studio was extremely reticent in depicting human-animal transformations, which occurred only in discrete cutaways, if shown at all. But following the success of Universal's Frankenstein, Hollywood woke up to the commercial potential of spectacular horror makeups, the more beastly the better. Island of Lost Souls featured a whole stampeding herd of animal people, including Bela Lugosi as the sayer of the law.
You made us in the house of pain. You made us sing. Not men. Not bees. Part man. Part beast. Sing.
Eager to develop a new project for its horror superstar Boris Karloff, Universal toyed with a screen story called The Wolfman by Robert Fleury, a French émigré director deeply committed to the principles of European expressionism. In Fleury's striking treatment set in the Bavarian Alps, Christoph, a young boy kidnapped and raised by wolves who had slaughtered his family, becomes a werewolf upon his rescue. But the ensuing story, including the young man's animal transformation in a confessional, was considered too extreme by Universal executives who worried about the reaction of the Catholic Church. Werewolf of London, produced by Universal in 1935, originally began as a variation of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, but soon began sprouting aspects of Fleury's Wolfman. It also took liberal inspiration from James Whale's The Invisible Man, especially in the person of a busybody landlady who lets rooms to a scientific monster.
What would you say if I were to tell you that it was possible for a man to turn into a werewolf?
I'd say I was Little Red Riding Hood.
The noted stage actor Henry Hull played Dr. Wilfred Glendon, an English botanist who becomes infected with the curse of the full moon during a research expedition to Tibet. The original werewolf, Dr. Yogami, played by Warner Oland, follows Glendon to London in pursuit of the rare plant that can provide a temporary antidote for lycanthropy.
Yogami, you brought this on me that night in Tibet. Sorry I can't share this with you.
Remember this, Dr. Glendon. The werewolf instinctively seeks to kill the thing it loves best.
Once more concerned about the censors, the studio took pains to make sure that the werewolf transformations weren't too horrifying or too hairy.
A very different makeup, much more subtle makeup. I've heard people describe it as the Elvis werewolf, you know, because he had this kind of, you know, a little widow's peak and these kind of sideburn kind of things. I did see a picture once that was supposed to have been a makeup test for the Werewolf of London. It looked much more like the Wolfman, the Lon Chaney Jr. makeup, very much like it. It was a much hairier face and a kind of a dog snout. And I don't know why they changed it. It was probably some executive, or maybe they were afraid, you know, maybe they thought it was too much, you know. You gotta pull back some. That happens sometimes. It happens to me sometimes, you know.
The makeup artist who created the Werewolf of London was Jack Pierce, the man responsible for all of Universal's classic monsters. He got his start at Universal when silent superstar Lon Chaney, the legendary Man of 1,000 Faces, who created all of his own makeups, walked off the set of the lavish costume drama The Man Who Laughs. The task of creating a mask-like grin for actor Conrad Veidt fell to Pierce, who quickly became Universal's official sculptor of living gargoyles. Chaney had a son named Creighton, who also wanted to act, but his father strenuously opposed the idea. After the older Chaney's untimely death, Creighton began acting under his own name and later, under studio pressure, as Lon Chaney Jr. Chaney scored an acting triumph in the film version of Steinbeck's Of Mice and Men, but the role of the simple-minded hulking Lenny typecast him in other hulking roles. At Universal, hulking meant one thing, and one thing only: monsters. In Ghost of Frankenstein, Chaney proved he could fill Boris Karloff's shoes, at least in the wardrobe sense. But the following year, Universal gave Chaney his own signature role that would complete the studio's stable of classic horror characters: Larry Talbot, a.k.a. the Wolfman.
The title is called The Wolfman. But it's not our title, belongs to Boris Karloff, but he cannot play in it because he has another assignment. But we have Lon Chaney.
Chaney was backed up by a distinguished cast, including Claude Rains, Ralph Bellamy, Evelyn Ankers, Patrick Knowles, Bela Lugosi, and in a part that would become her own signature screen role, Maria Uspenskaya as Maliva, the gypsy crone. Chaney's most dramatic support didn't come from another actor, but rather from makeup artist Jack Pierce, who contributed one of his most inspired creations.
Again, Lon Chaney Jr. had, you know, that kind of thankless job of sitting in the makeup chair and having all these torturous things put on him. It's funny, you know, when the things I read about Pierce, he would say he didn't like using rubber pieces, and he would fabricate things out of his kit, and that was what how makeup was done. But the Wolfman definitely has a rubber nose. I think it was in fact made by Ellis Berman Sr., who made rubber props at the time. So the Wolfman snout was a nose piece that kind of came like this, and you can very clearly see the edges of it through most of the film.
Because he used materials that were much less flexible than those makeup artists employ today, Pierce didn't try to create realistic wolf features, which would have been stiff and unconvincing. Rather, he used small appliances which only suggested a wolf's face and snout, while allowing Chaney to retain facial mobility and expression. The result was uniquely frightening.
The hair was yak hair, I believe, which is a hair that we still use today. It's a nice coarse hair, which was laid onto his face, where you would paint spirit gum onto the face, and with hunks of this hair laid on, cut it off. Keep laboriously building up layers of hair, as they would do beards in those days as well. And then he would singe the hair with a hot curling iron. He would probably have to dress it first with a hot curling iron, and then heat up the iron too much and kind of singe it to give it a little bit more of an animal kind of look. He then had like rubber gloves that had hair on it, and the rubber feet that he wore as well, and the teeth, of course, the lower teeth. It had to be an uncomfortable makeup to wear, because the spirit gum and the coarse hair glued to your face is not a comfortable thing to do. I know I've made myself up like that many times. and I know that Pierce and Chaney kind of would butt heads somewhat. Lon Chaney Jr. was a much bigger man than Jack Pierce, and I'm sure he didn't like sitting in the chair. In fact, I've seen a photo of him making a fist like he was going to punch Jack, and I'm sure he really felt like that many times.
Even when I went to the commissary, and then poor Lon Chaney was down there, it took him 6 hours to put on the makeup and 3 hours to take it off. He was sitting on, horrible looking, on a little table by himself, and he glowered at me and wanted to kill me. And I said, don't kill a poor writer who just gets his job. Why don't you kill Jack Pierce, who made you into a Wolfman? Leave me alone, right?
Something that always fascinated me about werewolf movies, and or even Jekyll and Hyde kind of films, was the transformation. And many times what they did in those days was they do a series of lap dissolves. Chaney Jr. would have to sit basically in the same place, sit down, and, he was fortunately in a chair when you saw the big transformation, where you would put a little bit of makeup on, photograph a scene, a little bit of the scene, add a little bit more makeup, photograph a little bit more, and overlap the two pieces of film. They'd fade out one and fade in the other. So he would always kind of move a little bit in those things. They perfected it later on in some of the later movies. I think Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman had a really nice one where he's in the hospital bed, and his head is on a pillow, and I'm sure it was a plaster pillow that he would fit perfectly in, like a mold of the back of his head. And I understand they actually used like a big format still camera, and traced, they had a front view and a side view, and they actually traced a profile and, and marked some areas to try to make sure he lined up better. I think Pierce's downfall, and I think this is such a sad story, and it's something that I learned from Jack's mistakes, was that he didn't progress with the times. He was continuing to do these out-of-the-kit makeups when at other studios people were doing makeups with new materials. They were making foam rubber appliances. The Wizard of Oz was one of the first foam rubber appliance films, and it sped up the process. It kept the continuity better. It was more comfortable for the actors, and it took a lot less time to make them up. Pierce would continue to use the same cotton and collodion techniques. He eventually was booted out, like Dr. Pretorius, out of the studio. After he created these films that helped save that studio, he was kind of very unceremoniously just fired. And then they brought in Bud Westmore to be the department head, who in Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein used foam rubber. They used foam rubber nose for Chaney Jr. They used a foam rubber forehead complete, from under the brow to the top of the head for Glenn Strange as the monster, and greatly sped up the whole makeup process. And I always felt that Jack was unrecognized through most of his life, and even though he got the credit on the end of the film, I always felt he didn't get the credit he deserved, in the public's eyes and stuff. But he kept this amazing scrapbook that had every letter that was ever sent to him, and all these articles that were done on him, and it gave me a different impression. He was recognized in his time. There were articles about him and calling him this makeup genius, but unfortunately he had that sad departure from the studio, and I'm sure that must have been a very difficult time for Jack to have been the head of that department and the makeup god at that studio, and all of a sudden to be looking for work.
Screenwriter Kurt Siodmak used only the title of Robert Florey's original Wolfman treatment and created his own werewolf mythology, very little of which was based on actual folklore.
Basically, all of my pictures have some scientific background somewhere, which makes them authentic. That's why they are still alive today.
Siodmak, who had fled Hitler's Germany, knew full well the real-world significance of people marked for death with the sign of a star.
What's the matter?
Can't tell you anything tonight. Come back tomorrow.
What did you see? Something evil?
No, no. Now go away. Go quickly. Go!
Yes, I'm going!
Siodmak was a German Jew who had had a very successful career both as a science fiction author and as a scriptwriter in Germany up until 1933, and of course with the advent of Hitler had to leave. He spent several years literally on the run. This gave him an appreciation of the fact that the world is a very unsettling place, a place where a very stable existence can suddenly turn into total chaos, which is exactly what happened to him.
Oh, I'm sick of the whole thing. I'm going to get out of here.
Whoever is bitten by a werewolf and lives becomes a werewolf himself.
This was my Wolfman fate. Wolfman fate, you know, you might go out of your house and somebody hits you with a car. If you go out 1 minute later, nothing happens to you. Qui sera, sera. We don't know what is going to happen to us.
I think this very much influenced his work then when he came to the United States and began working in Hollywood and specifically for Universal, and specialized then in kind of science fiction and horror films. And when he was given the assignment to write The Wolfman, I think he really felt that this was his material.
When the moon comes up, Larry Talbot, the name I gave the Wolfman, knows he has to become a murderer. In the Greek tragedies, the gods tell a man his fate. So it is constructed by chance, I didn't know it, like a Greek tragedy.
His autobiography is in the German title is called Under Wolf People, and that refers to the Germans, not all Germans, but the Germans who then became Nazis, who turned from very likable people into monsters.
In Siodmak's original script, the transformations were kept ambiguous, and it was never clear whether Larry Talbot really turned into a wolf or just imagined he did.
Now, you ask me if I believe a man can become a wolf. Well, if you mean can he take on the physical characteristics of an animal, no, it's fantastic. However, I do believe that most anything can happen to a man in his own mind.
Fortunately for monster fans, the studio ultimately decided to give the public what it wanted.
Obviously, it's a horror film, so he doesn't want to beat you over the head with the message. And indeed, the film takes place in really a Never Land. I mean, there's English gentry, and there's Maria Uspenskaya, who is a gypsy straight out of Romania somewhere, and people drive around in cars that are modern, so, I mean, and then there's covered wagons, and I mean, it is very much a mixture so that it is a Never Land.
Actually, in my original script, Larry Talbot was an American mechanic who went to Scotland to install a telescope. And they made him the son of a lord. I couldn't even imagine any worse casting than casting Lon Chaney Jr. as the son of an English lord, right? With his accent. But they did it, and what can I do?
All of these films were shot on the Universal backlot in the European Village, which, you know, one day would have to double as a Spanish town, and the next day is a German, and the next day is an English village, and they change a little bit here and there. So there's this kind of amorphous quality definitely has to do with the fact that it is the Universal backlot. But I think beyond that, the horror films were supposed to be very unspecific in terms of the time in which they played. It helped to reinforce the fact that this world of horror is not of this world. It is recognizable as a real place, and yet things happen there that are very unreal, and that's part of the pleasure in watching these films.
The Wolfman's impact was greatly enhanced by top-notch music, the combined effort of Frank Skinner, Hans Salter, and Charles Previn. Film music historian John Morgan and conductor William Stromberg recently undertook an ambitious reconstruction of the original score.
One thing that makes these horror films, the music to them, stand out compared to a lot of today's that you would put in the same kind of budget, the B horror film, is it's real music. They had real composers that may have not worked on A budgets, but they were A composers working on, B music budgets. And of course, because you have a small orchestra doesn't mean that you stop thinking or creating or finding ways of making wonderful music. Today's music, you find a lot of it is just a long drone, or they have cliches that they rip off from Psycho, or the same things over and over again. They don't get into characters, they don't get into drama or atmosphere. It's kind of just a wallpaper put on with a trowel. But this music for films like The Wolfman and all the Universal, Bride of Frankenstein, of Franz Waxman, it's real music.
When I'm preparing these scores for our new recordings, my kids now just love it. And they can sing all the main themes from all these classic films.
And tell them how old they are.
Yeah, they're just 4, 2 and 4.
And they can sing the intervals to the Wolfman.
Perfect.
I mean, you can be out there and they go, da, 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 Wolfman! Okay.
That's right.
The Wolfman theme itself, the famous 3-note motive, is outlining the tritone. And this is, in medieval music, it was always a forbidden interval, and it has a connotation of the devil's interval, and composers throughout time would use it to represent something evil.
Bela's funeral is a great example of music written for the film, a very long sequence originally. Portions of the sequence were cut out. Apparently there was a very eerie sequence with Bela actually watching the funeral procession. So the cue is like this 8-minute wonderful atmospheric piece of music, like a dirge. The music, it's basically like a cantus firmus, a pedal tone going through the whole cue, where he plays with the motifs on top of this pedal point.
Realizing it had killed off a potentially lucrative new monster, Universal once more called on screenwriter Kurt Siodmak to come to the rescue. Fortunately, being dead in a Universal horror movie did not necessarily create story problems. Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman was the studio's first pairing of 2 classic monster characters in the same film. The opening scene, in which grave robbers inadvertently raise Larry Talbot from the dead, remains one of the most atmospheric moments in any Universal horror film.
It looks like he's asleep.
Alive.
Help! Help!
Not at all happy about being restored to life, Larry spends most of the film desperately seeking assisted suicide.
He wants to die, but he cannot die. He knows he cannot die, so he's looking for the man who knows the secret of life and death.
Well, now I want to die too. Won't you show me the way?
I can't.
Even Maria Uspenskaya admits that gypsy magic has its limitations and recommends that Larry consult a scientific specialist.
We might be able to cure you, might prevent you.
I only want to die. That's why I'm here. If I ever find peace, I'll find it here. Now you understand. Why don't you help me?
Energy which cannot be destroyed can be transmitted.
Well, if that's the case, then the energies from my body can be drained off also.
But the plan to siphon off the Wolfman's life energy undergoes a last-minute change, and both monsters are restored to their full power for a titanic wrestling match. In the next film, House of Frankenstein, a frozen Wolfman and Frankenstein monster are thought out by mad scientist Boris Karloff, who recommends a novel cure for Larry's curse, a brain transplant.
I want to die. Only death can bring me release.
You don't have to die, my boy. You're wrong. I can help you.
Don't kill me. Don't kill me. Don't.
Kill my trusted old assistant? Why, no. I'm going to repay you for betraying me. I'm going to give that brain of yours a new home in the skull of the Frankenstein monster. As for you, Strauss, I'm going to give you the brain of the Wolfman.
While waiting for his new body, Larry is smitten with a beautiful young gypsy who discovers his secret and takes his cure into her own hands. Larry's death seemed pretty final, so when he turned up again in Universal's follow-up monster fest, House of Dracula, no attempt was made to explain his curious resilience. But some other things were explained. Dracula, we learned, suffered from a rare blood disease, and the Wolfman's problem wasn't so much the full moon as pressure on the brain.
This condition, coupled with your belief that the moon can bring about a change, accomplishes exactly that. During the period in which your reasoning processes give way to self-hypnosis, the glands which govern your metabolism get out of control. When this happens, the glands generate an abnormal supply of certain hormones. In your case, those which bring about the physical transformation which you experience.
And this time, a surgical procedure much less invasive than the one Boris Karloff had in mind actually did the trick, and Larry Talbot was finally relieved of his curse. Of course, a recovered werewolf isn't worth very much to a film studio. So when the time came for Abbott and Costello to meet the monsters, Larry's prior rehabilitation went discreetly unmentioned.
In a half an hour, the moon will rise, and I'll turn into a wolf.
You and 20 million other guys.
Listen, I might tear you limb from limb.
Is that serious?
He'll murder you.
That's serious.
This time, the Wolfman was something of a good Samaritan. Having put up with several nutty brain doctors in the past, he draws the line at the most dubious practitioner of them all, Count Dracula. Played by Bela Lugosi in his last role for a major studio, Dracula ends up assisting in Larry Talbot's long-sought suicide, though he's not exactly a willing participant. In the half-century since the Wolfman's last screen appearance, he has inspired countless imitations. More recent films have benefited from larger budgets, widescreen color, and highly advanced makeup and special effects. But no matter how accomplished these films are, there is still only one Larry Talbot.
The way you walked was thorny, through no fault of your own. But as the rain enters the soil, the river enters the sea. So tears ran to a predestined end. Your suffering is over. Now you will find peace for eternity.
The Wolfman Saga was the final addition to Universal's golden age of classic horror, a tradition still revered and celebrated by generations of film fans and film professionals.
I think everybody, especially people of my generation, you know, that grew up with those films on TV, you know, there's a special place in their heart for them, you know, and they, you know, they may not be the best films in the world, but I think they're pretty damn good, and they definitely have inspired a lot of filmmakers and a lot of makeup effects people and just a lot of strange people around the world, you know.
As the Wolfman, Larry Talbot only wanted to die, but somehow the public just wouldn't allow it. He came back again and again, in movie after movie, was resurrected on television, in monster magazines and model kits, on video cassette and laserdisc, and now on DVD. It just goes to prove you can't keep a good monster down, but why would you ever want to? I'm John Landis.